What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. So, now we're looking at Numbers chapter 30. Definitely a bit shorter than the previous chapter was, although I kind of glossed over a fair number of verses because it was getting quite repetitive. But now we're looking at laws concerning vows, which some of this, once again, I believe was mentioned in a previous chapter. It's just now we've got to make sure that the new generation who should be going into the promised land are aware of these laws and regulations and standards for how they should live once they get to the promised land. So, I don't think I need to really introduce this much further. So here we go. Numbers chapter 30. Then Moses summoned the leaders of the tribes of Israel and told them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. A man who makes a vow to the Lord or makes a pledge under oath must never break it. He must do exactly what he said he would do." It seems pretty self-explanatory. I mean, don't break your promises is kind of a general rule of thumb in life. But also, if you're going to make a vow to God, all the more reason to not break that vow. Footnote there at the beginning is just because the last verse in chapter 29 in the original Hebrew text is actually the first verse of this chapter. It's just saying how the numbering's different. Now I know there was a previous chapter where like Nazirite vows specifically were discussed, and maybe some other vows more generically speaking. But anyway, okay, moving on. Verse 3. If a young woman makes a vow to the Lord or a pledge under oath while she is still living at her father's home, and her father hears of the vow or pledge and does not object to it, then all her vows and pledges will stand. But if her father refuses to let her fulfill the vow or pledge on the day he hears of it, then all her vows and pledges will become invalid. The Lord will forgive her because her father would not let her fulfill them. Which, there's probably too many possibilities on, reasons why a father would potentially not want that to happen, but, suffice it to say, while living in her father's house, any vow or pledge made by a young woman, would have been subject to her father's discretion. But it doesn't say that for the men, which is, full disclosure, I mean, this was a very patriarchal society back in those days. Daughters, generally speaking, did not get a lot of privileges that sons did, such as, birthrights and, inheritances and things of that sort, which was why the whole issue with Zelophehad's daughters a couple of chapters ago was so, unheard of. I wouldn't necessarily equate women with property back in those days, but they were very much, supposed to be submissive, accepting, and, basically they were, the men had command over them. If the circumstances even, slightly, had that possibility. Gonna hop into verse 6 here. Now, suppose a young woman makes a vow or binds herself with an impulsive pledge and later marries. If her husband learns of her vow or pledge and does not object on the day he hears of it, her vows and pledges will stand. But if her husband refuses to accept her vow or impulsive pledge on the day he hears of it, he nullifies her commitments, and the Lord will forgive her. If, however, a woman is a widow or is divorced, she must fulfill all her vows and pledges. Okay, so similar thing with women who were married. The husband sort of had, ability to decide whether the vows and pledges were valid, similar to how the previous few verses mentioned the father having that privilege if the woman was living in her father's house. It's just now it's the husband's house instead. But if widowed or divorced, then there's no man to, pull rank on the situation and, deny such a vow or pledge. And again, with it being as kind of vague and not very descriptive as it is, I don't think it would be fair to try and go through all the possibilities of why one may or may not want these vows carried out. Because, there's a lot of ways that you could possibly make a vow about something. And, again, I think the previous time that vows were mentioned, I kind of had the idea that, similar to what some people might do as a sort of New Year's resolution type of thing, or just similar, resolutions, commitments, vows that might be made at any given time. It's kind of a similar idea of, committing yourself to either doing or not doing a certain thing, or multiple certain things. Maybe even going on a diet. Where, there's a bunch of possibilities there. Some of those might be beneficial, more so for one person than another, and that's all the more I'll get into in terms of possible examples. But just to give you a better idea of what we might be discussing here. Moving on to verse 10. But suppose a woman is married and living in her husband's home when she makes a vow or binds herself with a pledge. If her husband hears of it and does not object to it, her vow or pledge will stand. But if her husband refuses to accept it on the day he hears of it, her vow or pledge will be nullified, and the Lord will forgive her. So her husband may either confirm or nullify any vows or pledges she makes to deny herself. But if he does not object on the day he hears of it, then he is agreeing to all her vows and pledges. If he waits more than a day and then tries to nullify a vow or pledge, he will be punished for her guilt. These are the regulations the Lord gave Moses concerning relationships between a man and his wife, and between a father and a young daughter who still lives at home. Specifically regarding vows. Basically, whether the vow was made by the woman before or after they got married, once the husband hears of it, he has, ability to consent or not to her vow. Now this says specifically any vows or pledges she makes to deny herself, which is kind of the more common amongst, what you might call vows or resolutions or anything of that sort, rather than committing to do something. So that might be if these vows are specifically related to denying rather than adding a good thing, that might be the only slight difference between what you might think of today as, some resolution, or even for Lent, a lot of people will give things up. It's probably a similar idea to that. But yeah, the husband can't wait too long. Otherwise, like, apparently if he waits more than a day, it's like he basically consents to it. And so then if he tries to say, no, don't fulfill this vow after he's already sort of consented, then it's like, well, you're now causing her to go against her vow that you were seemingly in agreement with. So, like, what up with that, dude? Like, just let her go. Let her do the thing. Also, if the one under you does not follow through with a vow, you are punished for that vow. Because you're supposed to be leading that person, so to speak. Which is part of the reason why the consent of the father or husband was important. Because in their structure, with the husband or father being the head of the house, they, you know, if any such vows were then not followed up on, then they weren't quite fulfilling their role as leader, and, you know, helping to make sure that those vows are followed through on. Because again, these are vows and pledges made to God. Like, these are not to be trifled with. So, anyway. And that's also why, in amongst all this, it never mentions a punishment for the women. Of course, also when it mentioned a man making a vow, it said he must never break it. So, I would assume, you know, in a similar line of thinking, if, you know, a widowed or divorced woman living on her own made a vow, she is held to a similar expectation. And in the case of, you know, young daughter or married woman, the husband or father is held to that expectation, basically, to not break the vow. Because again, vow is to the Lord. Don't be making promises you can't keep, especially to God. So anyway, I guess that about wraps it up for chapter 30. Okay, so, kind of a short chapter, and there was a previous chapter regarding vows and some of the regulations to follow regarding that. This chapter was actually, to my recollection, entirely new information. Pretty much just regarding who sort of had the lead, enforcing, for lack of a better word, making sure that vows are followed up on. And, like, a lot about, you know, women kind of respecting their either father's or husband's wishes regarding taking or not taking vows. But anyway, yeah. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments down below there with any thoughts you have. So that's it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.